friends, it's Terry from Sisterhood of the Traveling Brush, and welcome to episode 4 of Furniture Painting 101. Today we are discussing choosing the best paint for your project. I have a few samples here that I'm going to hold up as I talk about them, but I'm going to kind of just go down the list and not use a whole lot of your time, but share as much information as I can. There are 4 basic options for furniture paint, and they're water-based, oil-based, acrylic, or resin-based. And the first option is to make your own, and we'll link the video here in the bottom for that if you are interested in making your own chalk or mineral or clay paint. I've made videos on making your own for all of those. I don't recommend it, but if you know, it's where I started and I did it that way for a couple of years. So if you're wanting to try it that way first, I have definitely videos on making your own chalk paint and clay paint using like regular Sherwin-Williams household paint. Then that's where your first option would be using latex paint. That's like your Sherwin-Williams paint, your Behr paint, the Benjamin Moore paint, the kind that wall paint. That's what we normally would consider that, and you get that at, you know, at their own particular store or at your home center. I think even Walmart has paint like that. Those are not those are intended on sticking to like drywall. This is has a little tooth to it to begin with, and normally even over drywall you use a primer or a paint with a built-in primer. So these are not made to stick to wood, stick to metal, stick to plastic, or stick to the things that we're going to find on furniture. But you can do it, and if you're going to do it, that's where you would add the calcium carbonate or clay or whatever you want to add to it. Your next option is your clay-based paint. And I have Junk Monkey here in a couple of places because this does have clay in it. I do enjoy Junk Monkey paint. I think Sonia, the owner of the company, is a fantastic workhorse of a person. But it's thick. You can leave the lid off and have it get even thicker, but it has acrylic resins, clay, minerals. It's ultra matte, self-leveling. It has all the things in it, so it wouldn't be considered just a true clay paint. Mud paint is another one that has clay in it, but it also has, I've not used it yet. You'll see a review video here in the near future. Has a little bit of a smell to it, kind of like somewhere between Sherwin-Williams and powdered milk maybe. But it does have a clay base to it, but it also has other options in it. The DIY, from what I understand, from what Debbie says, Debbie Beard, the owner of this company, this is the only true clay-based paint. I don't know if I can even get it open right now. On the market, only 9 ingredients, tons of extra pigments have to be added. Because it is clay-based and it takes a lot, so that's why we can water it down so much and have so many options with that. But with this, you always have to use a sealer, so, which means there's a plus to it. You can always reactivate it with water. And in my instance, if your husband walks by after rinsing his hands and shakes them, then there's little spots all over it and it's just ruined your finish. So you do have to protect it because you'll be able to come back to it, mist water on it 2 hours later and re-blend with it just as if you just started. But you know, that can also accidentally happen. So seal between coats is what I do if you're not blending and you're wanting to do something layered. But it's a no VOC, very natural paint. You get more artistic finishes with it. You can do some really cool layering techniques with it. The wet distressing is second to none, where you would distress with like a damp cloth rather than sandpaper, and it can be done, you know, 2 weeks after you paint it. You can reactivate it and do that. So it does have benefits of using that one as well. The next paint that we'll discuss, which is the most common, is called chalk paint. but the words chalk paint are trademarked and owned by the brand Annie Sloan, who was the one credited for creating the furniture painting industry, using chalky style paints or additives that give that tooth and that grip so that there's very little prep work required whenever you're using these paints, because they have sort of an adhesion agent built in. There's Annie Sloan, the original Jolie Home, which is an ultra matte finish, and I had it in my studio, but I couldn't find it here. Let me stop right here too and say some of these are higher quality paints than others. They're definitely all going to be higher quality paints than, you know, whatever the Walmart name brand is or whatever. And what that means by the higher quality is how much pigment is added in there. And that's whether or not you can get by with one coat, whether it takes 2 coats, or some of the paints even require 3 coats to get good coverage. So that all depends on the quality of the paint and the amount of pigments that are in there. So you do get pretty good coverage with most of these, but there are some better than others. So there's Jolie Home, which is ultra matte. Magical Chalk Paint by Paint Pixie. I recently did a video on a canvas on that one. Country Chic, that was the first one I tried years ago. Miss Lillian's No Wax Chalk Paint. Wise Owl Chalk Synthesis. Rust-Oleum has a good one that's, you know, like your store-bought one. And you could even put your regular Dixie Belle has chalk in it, so it is considered a chalky style paint as well. And I would put Junk Monkey in that category as well, and probably the Farmhouse paint. These have the calcium carbonate, which is chalk, added to them to give the adhesion, so there's less prep work required when you're painting furniture. These are what I would consider furniture paints. Those are the ones that you try every day. And I've not tried Wise Owl Chalk Synthesis. I hope to in the near future. I've not tried Miss Lillian's, but I've used all of the other ones, and sort of you can let your price be the guide a little bit on what's the higher quality on that. And I know Annie Sloan's the most expensive. I don't, and was the original, but I don't know that that's the best. But it's going to be, you know, all of the others that I've mentioned here are going to be right along the lines of it. Or you can look where I've reviewed each of these individually, and I'm going to tell you the truth on it, how many coats it takes me. Then you would move into the category of acrylic-based chalk and mineral paint. That's your Dixie Belle paint, your Farmhouse paint, once again, the Junk Monkey paint. Who else do we have there? General Finishes, Heirloom Traditions. All of those are considered chalk paints, but they have an acrylic base, which means they don't absolutely have to have a top coat over them, although you can use, you know, all the waxes and the dark waxes and the distressing and all the things with them. If somebody walks by and flings their hands, it's not going to reactivate it. And if you're going to wet distress it, you have to do it immediately before that coat dries, but it can be done. But the regular distressing with your sander will be best for that. But it does have, because of the acrylic base, it does have I don't want to say a top coat built in, but a binder built in to where your finish is finished and you don't have to add anything else if you don't want to. That's what I use the very most. I use Dixie Belle the very most. I probably use DIY the second most, and then move on from there. But those are the basic good furniture painting paints. That would be your acrylic, chalk, mineral. These have clays, these have chalks, these have acrylics. They have all of the good stuff in it. Then you have your mineral paints. Those don't have the chalk in them, but so you're not going to get that matte finish that needs or looks best when it has a top coat over it. But that would be like your Silk All-in-One, and I've not tried this one yet, but I have it, the All-in-One by Heirloom Traditions. And what All-in-One means is it has a stain blocking primer built in, and it has your paint in there obviously, but it also has a top coat built in, not like this where it has resin, not resins, but where it has binders in it, but where the actual top coat is there. You do not ever need to add another top coat unless you're wanting to just add an extra layer of something or change it from being sort of the eggshell satin that it is to a flat or a glossy. You can add top coats, but you absolutely, there is one built in and you don't have to. They do have minerals in there, so it is going to work like the other furniture paints, but you do use them a little bit differently. All of these you can add water to, thin them down, mist them, make it flow better. Your all-in-ones you don't want to add the extra water to, or very, very little if you live in a dry climate, because you don't want to sort of weaken all of the things that are in there that, you know, make it have the base coat and the top coat. But it doesn't have a bonding primer built in, so if you were going to paint on Formica or some type of slick surface, you would still need to scuff sand or use something like slick stick so that it would be able to grab and adhere. Other paints are milk paint. I've not used milk paint a lot. I do have a couple of videos where I used the Junk Monkey brand milk paint. It's different. It comes in a powder form. You mix it up with water. It has milk protein, casein proteins in it, and that's an old style paint, and those are used really good for distressed pieces, or what do you call it, where pieces are flaking off and crackling and looking old and all that. Those paints are really, really good for that, and you don't have to go all the extra steps of using crackle or using the sea salt stuff or whatever that's called, and it's actually built in. And Junk Monkeys, well, I've used two, and I don't even have the other brand written here, and I don't remember it, but Junk Monkey General Finishes makes one. Sweet Pickins Milk Paint is another very popular one. Real Milk Paint and Miss Mustard Seeds Milk Paint are all very popular, so that's another option. Then you have resin paints, and when I was looking up the information on the farmhouse, which I've not used yet, I have it right here and I'll be using it within the next couple of weeks. It says our proprietary resins deliver premium high quality paint that's unique, so I'm guessing because of that this would be a resin based paint. Single step process, almost any surface, no sanding or priming, ultra adhesion, chip resistant, water based water cleanup. And then there's one called Rethunk Junk by Laura. I've never used it, but they say you always use a bristle brush, no chip brushes. It does self level. Wax is not recommended, and there's no chalk in it. So that's another. Then there's enamel paints. Wise Owl 1 Hour Enamel. I've not used it. I want to use it and try it. Enamel paints are really hard, and they're resistant to a lot of wear and tear and weather and things like that. I've used enamel paint from Sherwin-Williams to paint the door on my store years ago because it, you know, those get a lot of use and need to be wiped down a lot, and it was, you can't paint over that afterwards. So you got to know that's what you're going to stick with for a while, or you're going to have to sand that off. But it is an option, but it is a different paint, and it has a different, I don't know what to put it. It's going to last a long time, but you can't paint over it later on. And then you also have your craft paint, like your Deco Arts or your Cracker Barrel. Probably not Cracker Barrel. Dumplings would be good right now. Craft Barrel. Those are paints without a whole lot of pigments in there. Even if you're using that on a craft project or making a sign or something like that, you often need a second coat. And you may have the patience for that. I don't have the patience for that. I don't like to do, if I put a second coat, I feel like I've really done something. I am not wanting to put a third coat and feel like I don't have good coverage. That frustrates me. I want to be able to put on a coat and have that be either totally good enough or maybe feel like it needs touching up, or a second coat would deepen the color or something like that, but not to where, oh my goodness, I don't even know whether a second coat's going to cover this or not. That's why I like Dixie Belle paints that have a lot of pigments and give good coverage. Then you have your artist acrylics, like your Blick acrylics, Liquitex, Golden. Obviously you wouldn't paint a whole piece of furniture with this, but if you know, because it would be very expensive. But those are good brands that have good they're not too sheer. You're going to get good coverage with them. But what you'll use those for is if you're painting a design on the front of your piece or something decorative on there, you can do that with your regular paints, but you can also, or do it with your DIY, then seal it, then come back and do that. I'll often just use this because it's an acrylic base anyways, but sometimes I don't have the color I need, or I'm wanting to add a neon, or I'm wanting to, you know, just do small details and have my whole little palette ready. Then I'll use my artist acrylics on a piece of furniture. Then there are additives that you can add to your paints, and all of them haven't been tested on every paint. I can tell you who they're made by and that kind of thing. DIY has a new frosting, and that's a liquid you add to your paint, stir it in, give it, you know, 20 minutes to an hour or whatever to sort of puff up and thicken. Then you use it like frosting to get a thicker textured finish, to do raised stencils and things like that with it. Then there's salt wash, and that one you mix with like the Dixie Belle paint. Same thing, you would put it on there with all its peaks and valleys using a palette knife or whatever, a putty knife. And then when it dries most of the way, you can knock some of those peaks down, and it's really going to give an old textured, worn look to the piece. And that looks really good under like rust and things from the patinas. And you can use it in raised stencils. Then you have mud, chalk, plaster, sand, drywall compound. Those are all additives that can be added to any paint to thicken it. Usually it doesn't change the color, so I use that a lot. I use the Dixie Belle mud most of the time, but for raised stencils and things like that. And that can also be used for filling in areas of veneer that have lifted and things like that. Then you have accelerators, extenders. Those are things you add to your paint to, like Floetrol or something like that, that you would add to your paint to give it a longer working time, because most of these dry pretty quick, like to the touch within a half an hour. And then there's a curing time, of course, but dry to the touch. Then there's pigmented enamels, glazes, and mostly the glazes are very similar for making your own. You would use like the Dixie Belle satin top coat, choose whatever color you want to, mix it 50-50, and then you have a glaze of that color. I prefer using, making a wash, and I do that with 50-50 paint and water, and then put that over, and it stays in the details and the edges, and you can wipe it off from the center, and you have more workability with it. But that would be using your same paints. Stains, that's not exactly in the paint category, but just letting you know they come in oil base or water base. And like the Dixie Belle No Pain Gel Stain, that one is an oil base. There's going to be a strong smell. You want to wear gloves. You don't want to get it under your fingernails, but it's not going to penetrate. That's not a penetrating stain. That's a stain that stays on top of the surface. So you may still be able to see some of your wood grain through there, especially if you wipe some of it back, but you can also build it with several layers to get a depth of color that you wouldn't have if you wiped it back. Then there's your water-based stains. That's like the Voodoo Gel Stain from Dixie Belle. Those actually penetrate into the wood grain and sort of tint, is a good way to put it, the wood, and you see all of that wood grain through there. So it sinks in, and then would still need to put some kind of top coat on to protect the wood, the actual wood later on. But you can also take most of these colors, and you can use like the DIY Dark and Decrepit as a stain, but you can also take these paints and water them down at least 50-50, but maybe even like 80-20 paint to water, and then use that as a penetrating stain. If I wanted to stain it orange, I could use this, or yellow, I could use this, water it down, wipe it on, and it's going to tint that wood. So if you wanted that sort of old boat look, I don't know what you call that boat look, or an old boho look where maybe part of your picnic table is teal and then yellow and then pink. Each of the boards are different and more intensity of color on one than the other. You would do that and make your own by watering that down. So I hope that was helpful. If you have any questions, make sure and just let me know. And I would be happy to answer them and help you in any way that I can. But the instances where you would use these, you want to be more artistic, you want to wet distress, you want to have the paint look almost watercolor-like. You can get that awesomeness with DIY. You don't want to have to put a sealer in between each layer. You want to be one and done. You want to, there's like 70-something colors of this. Easy to use from the beginning, and you can do, regular distressing, all kinds of additives. Dixie Belle is fantastic for that. You don't want to add a top coat later. You don't want to do a whole lot of anything, worrying about whether or not the paint needs a primer of any kind first, adhesion primer. Well, you would still need to do a light sanding with this one, but you don't want to put a top coat on it all after, and you want it to be able to go outside and live in the rain without an issue. Then I would use the Silk All-in-One. And if you want to make your own, we'll put those video links below. And I appreciate you, and we'll see you in the next video. Make sure to subscribe and do the little bell thing, the thing, so that you get the notifications. And we are back here every week sharing all the info that we have. I hope you have a successful furniture flipping business, and I'll see you soon.